The air grew colder as the night deepened, and the scent of flowers in the field mingled with the chill and the silence, creating an eerie yet peaceful atmosphere. Liu Tri stood by the window, gazing at the still flowers in the cold night. The strong fragrance of the blossoms always brought a strange feeling, neither joy nor sorrow. It was a complex emotion that Lan couldn't quite put into words. Her mind was empty. She hadn't slept in days. The pressure from her work and life had drained her energy. There were times when Lan felt that her life had become a monotonous routine, eating, working, and sleeping over and over again. This endless cycle of survival made her feel insignificant. She often wondered what she was striving for. 3 years of marriage had made Lan realize that her married life had become equally dull. Her husband, Zhong, was a man consumed by work. He was always immersed in his job and never once took time to think about her. For 3 years, they hadn't had a single day where they could truly be together. His thoughts were always occupied with work, with the company, and with projects. It felt as if there was no room for Lan in his heart or mind. She had quietly walked beside him in life, like a shadow. Over time, she had even forgotten to remind him to take care of his health. Despite her pain, she had never once complained about his indifference, even when she cried alone on their anniversaries. Lan had accepted it all. She was only 28, but it felt like her life had already been decided. Now, Lan only longed for one thing, a child to care for, to hold in her arms. If she could have that, she would forget about everything else. She would no longer care about Zhong, his busy life, or his endless work. But even this simple wish seemed to be beyond her reach. Despite trying every possible method, they still didn't have a child. Lan had suggested that Zhong go for an examination with her, but his job always kept him too busy to make time. She sighed as she looked at the clock. It was already near midnight, and another sleepless night awaited her. Zhong had been away on a business trip for nearly a month. Whether he was home or not seemed irrelevant, as she always felt alone. But tonight felt different. Lan had had enough. She had been longing for a change, for excitement. It had been so long since she had gone out, since she had heard sweet words or felt tender gestures. She couldn't help but wonder, had she really become so old, so insignificant? At 28, she was still so young, still full of desires. Why should she bury herself in a dull and meaningless marriage like this? Lan put on a light jacket and stepped outside, hailing a taxi. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked with a bright smile. "I'm not sure yet," she replied, somewhat embarrassed. "Let's just go. I'll figure it out." The driver, seeing her mood, kindly added, "Oh, don't worry. Everything will be fine. We'll just drive around for a while." Lan gave a small laugh. "Maybe you're right. I'm getting old, not heartbroken or anything." The driver continued, "You know, before getting married, life was so much simpler. But after marriage, it's just about making money every day. It's all about money, money, money. It's like you wake up and the first thought is, how do I make more money today?" He chuckled, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "Well, it's a late hour, but it looks like you might have made a bit of money today. You don't seem too down about it." Lan smiled softly. She had heard that kind of talk before, but it hit her differently tonight. "Right," she responded. "Before I got married, life was more carefree, but now it's all about money and responsibility." The driver nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, it's late. I was about to head home myself. My wife always worries if I'm late, so I have to make sure to get back early. Money's important, but family always comes first." He looked at her through the mirror and smiled warmly. "I'll drop you off here, and you can walk a little bit. It'll do you good." Lan hesitated for a moment, then agreed. "All right, I'll get out here." As she stepped out of the cab, the driver offered, "You know, there's a club nearby. Young people, handsome faces, beautiful girls. It might be a good place for you tonight." Lon smiled faintly, nodding. This was her first time entering a bar like this, so different from the life she knew. The place was quiet, with soft music filling the air. Lon slowly walked inside, searching for a place to sit. She had never ventured out during this time before. After work, she would always be at home, watching TV, and then going to bed. Jong always came home late, only to pick up his phone and scroll through Facebook. At times, Lon felt as though she didn't even exist beside him. Sitting alone in the bar, surrounded by couples being affectionate with each other, Lon felt a sense of loneliness so deep that it almost made her physically ache. She realized then that she needed to do something. She couldn't keep living like this. "I'll have a bottle of your finest wine," she said, her voice calm but resolute. The waiter gave her a knowing glance, and Lon silently took in the scene around her. There was no one else here alone like she was, but somehow watching others in love was strangely fascinating. She chuckled to herself at the thought. The waiter returned with a bottle of wine and a small glass, uncorking the bottle and pouring a little into the glass. "Here you go," he said, offering the drink to her. Lon nodded, acknowledging his kindness, and took a sip. The sharp taste of the alcohol brought a strange excitement to her. She raised her head, drinking the entire glass. As she reached for the bottle to pour herself another drink, someone suddenly grabbed it. "Very nice to meet you, miss," a young man's voice said, as he took the bottle and poured her another glass. Lon looked up and froze. Standing before her was a tall, handsome young man. He was quite handsome, maybe younger than Lan. She gave a slight smile, picked up her glass of wine, and took a small sip. "Would you mind if you sat here with me?" she asked softly. Without waiting for Lan's reply, the young man eagerly pulled up a chair and sat next to her. "But you might be younger than me. How come you call me brother so sweetly?" Lan teased with a sarcastic tone. He smiled and said, "I believe age doesn't matter here. Meeting each other is a chance, a destiny. Why not nurture that connection and let it grow instead of getting bogged down by age?" "Everything has its order," Lan responded with a smirk. "Sisters are sisters, and brothers are brothers." The young man grinned back. "But you can't always judge by age. Perhaps I'm younger than you, yet I think it's natural for women to call men brother, just to keep things in balance. After all, rules are made by people, right?" Lan couldn't help but laugh. "But what if there's no rule? Who's to say?" "Then, in that case, may I offer you a drink?" the young man asked playfully. Lan shook her head. "No, I'm already drinking mine." "Then let me drink with you," he suggested. "Drinking alone can be quite dull." A clink of glasses echoed as they toasted, and Lan smiled lightly. "You're right. Drinking alone does lack something. Let's drink together. By the way, is there anyone who'll come and scratch my face for sitting here with you?" he teased. Lan chuckled. "Maybe someone would, but I doubt it. I'm guessing we both might be lonely tonight, and that's why we're here. If anyone else were with you, you wouldn't be sitting here, and I wouldn't be drinking alone, right?" A strange sense of connection formed between them. Two lonely souls drinking together. Doesn't that sound more interesting? Lan laughed out loud, feeling like this young man was more interesting than she expected. They continued drinking, their conversation growing more familiar and relaxed. Lan usually had a good tolerance for alcohol, but compared to this young man, she couldn't keep up. Slowly, she started feeling tipsy. "May I know your name?" the young man asked, his arm casually draping over her shoulder, pulling her closer. "What's in a name?" he continued. "We are like passing breezes in each other's lives. Isn't that a bit more thrilling? A brief encounter like this, no need for names." Lan, feeling a bit more daring with the alcohol in her system, responded with a sly smile. "Tonight, I want to drink until I'm really drunk. Will you join me?" He grinned. "For you, anything. Let's drink." They ordered another bottle of wine, and with each passing minute, the space between them grew smaller. The alcohol made Lan more flirtatious, bolder, and a bit reckless. By the time they were nearing the second bottle, she could hardly keep her balance. Lon slumped her head onto the table. "Can you take me home?" she mumbled. The young man leaned closer, offering to help. "Do you want to go home or—" "No, I don't want to go home," she replied. "I want something else. Just for tonight, let's be together. No strings attached? Tomorrow we go our separate ways." The young man was taken aback for a moment, but then smiled. "If that's what you want, I'll be happy to help you feel better." After paying for the drinks, he helped Lon out of the bar, leading her to a luxurious car waiting outside. He opened the door for her, then drove her to a nearby hotel just a short distance away. On the way there, Lon felt a bit uneasy, even guilty for what she was about to do. "How could I let myself go this easily with a man I've never even met before?" she thought. She had always been chased by many men, but to even hold her hand, they had to be persistent. But tonight, things felt different. She felt an intense longing to be held by someone. The desire for something more, something wild, had overtaken her. Even as she thought about it, she couldn't bring herself to care about keeping her dignity anymore. She just wanted to feel something. The alcohol blurred her senses, making her feel numb but free at the same time. She closed her eyes, letting the stranger lead her to the hotel. Sometimes a one-night experience can be interesting too, she thought. At the hotel, she took the initiative. She removed the white dress she was wearing and tossed it aside, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The chair in the corner of the room was where the man sat. He was truly a remarkable person. The moment he brought Lon a feeling so extraordinary, something she had never experienced before, was unlike anything Dong had ever given her. That night, the feeling of sinful indulgence left Lon breathless. She couldn't help but convince herself that if men could be so reckless, why couldn't women also indulge in their desires? She drifted into sleep, overwhelmed by a sense of joy, a combination of fleshly pleasure and the wild rebellion of her soul, emotions long suppressed. In a hurry, Lon sat up, taking a full minute to recollect herself. Only then did she remember where she was. The man who had shared her bed the previous night had already left. He had left a bundle of cash and a business card on the table, bearing the name Tran Kok Kwong, the CEO of Company X, a wealthy, arrogant man. Lon picked up the business card and stared at it for a long while. For a moment she considered throwing it away, but then she decided to slip it into her wallet. She had no intention of ever meeting him again, but somehow it felt like a memory worth preserving, something only she would know the origin of. Lon pulled back the curtain and looked out the window. The street below was bathed in the golden light of the morning sun. People bustled about, their hurried footsteps a stark contrast to the peaceful quiet inside her room. After getting dressed quickly, Lon left the hotel in haste. She was anxious that someone might recognize her as she stepped outside, so she wrapped a light scarf around her face, hoping to remain unnoticed. She walked briskly, almost as if trying to escape something. The sun beat down on the sidewalk, and the fragrance of the sweet milk flowers, hoa sua, filled the air, enveloping Lan in a sense of calm. It was as if the hangover of the night before had faded away, leaving her with nothing but a faint smile on her lips. She laughed softly to herself, reflecting on her own madness. Last night's experience would remain a secret, a thrilling, unspoken memory just for her. Today was Sunday, and Lon had plans. She decided to stop by the supermarket for a few groceries before heading home. When she got there, Lon thought about cooking a nice meal and inviting some of her closest friends over. It had been so long since they had all gathered. Between work, family, and life's responsibilities, there hadn't been much time for socializing. Lon felt the need to reconnect, to breathe life back into her friendships. Life just didn't feel as meaningful when you were alone. She was the first to reach out. "Xuan, come over to my place today. Let's have a little get-together." But Xuan responded with disappointment. "I can't today, Lan. My baby's still too young, and there's no one to watch her. Plus, my husband's home today, so I thought we could spend some time together. Maybe another day, okay? Lon felt deflated. She had been so looking forward to hosting her friends, but now she was met with rejection. She wasn't discouraged yet, though. There was still Mai Trang, her friend from high school, whom she still caught up with every now and then over coffee. Lon called her. "Trang, come on, let's get together. I'm in the mood to cook and host. Why don't you come over?" But once again, she heard a familiar excuse. "I'm sorry, Lon. I can't. It's Sunday, and it's the only day I get to stay home with my family. You know how it is. My husband is always asking for attention, and my little one is unwell today. I'll take a rain check." Lon hung up the phone, the weight of disappointment sinking in. It was strange. Her phone book was full of contacts, but no one was available when she really needed them. Loneliness had a way of creeping in when you least expected it. With a sigh, Lan collapsed onto the sofa. It was then that her phone rang. It was Jong. They hadn't talked in over a week. Their conversations had slowed down recently, perhaps due to their busy work lives or the fact that they no longer had much to talk about. They were both in different fields with no shared concerns to bond over, and neither of them had the habit of checking in just to ask how the other was doing. But for some reason, today, Jong had called. Lon couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt creeping in. She answered the call with a teasing challenge. "Is the world shaking, or did the earth move? Why are you calling me today?" "Oh, you're funny," Jong replied. "Yes, there's an earthquake in Japan right now. It's raining heavily here. How are you?" Lon raised an eyebrow, amused by his calm response despite the dramatic news. "Oh, wow, really? I didn't know that. How's work going? When are you flying back to Vietnam?" "I'll be flying back in 2 days. My work wrapped up ahead of schedule, thank God. It's been a hectic few weeks, but it's finally done." Jong sounded relieved, but there was a subtle tone in his voice that made Lan's heart beat faster. Lon smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. "That's great. Do you need me to pick you up from the airport?" "Actually, if you're free, it'd be wonderful," Jong replied. "My flight lands on Tuesday at 6 p.m. in Hanoi. Will you be able to make it?" "Of course. I'll be there to pick you up," Lon responded, her voice soft. They chatted for a few more minutes, but deep down, Lon felt a flutter in her chest. The connection was still there, even though so much had changed. "Take a break. I'll finish up the last bit of work here." He placed his phone down on the table. Lon lazily collapsed on the sofa, stretched out. Today, she would clean up the house to prepare for her husband's return. It had been more than a month since she had done this. Lon stood up and began tidying up the living room. Dust had accumulated on the dining table, which hadn't been used in ages. No one had sat there for a long time. The kitchen was cold, untouched for 2 weeks. Lon had been eating out recently, so there hadn't been any cooking. She began wiping down the surfaces. Perhaps this would be the biggest joy of her weekend, the only task to occupy her thoughts these past few days. The arrival of winter made her feel a little nervous. Perhaps it was the excitement from last night's encounter with a stranger that left her with fluttering feelings. But maybe that was just the sensation of someone who had done something for the first time, like a thief sneaking around and worrying about being caught. But those feelings weren't anything significant. After all, he didn't even know her name. It was a pure, physical, lust-driven encounter. No emotions, no attachment. Yet, after the rush of pleasure, it lingered in her mind. Sometimes she found herself smiling, reminiscing about what had happened, but it didn't matter. She wouldn't see him again. She probably should have thrown away the business card he had given her. As she worked, Lon's thoughts wandered aimlessly. Life wasn't always easy, was it? Sometimes people had to keep a secret, something personal, something that only they knew. It made life more interesting, more meaningful. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Lon was puzzled. It was already past noon, and no one usually came to visit her at this time. "Hello, ma'am. I have a flower delivery for you. Could you please sign here?" The delivery guy handed her the receipt. Lan was shocked. The sender's name was Tran Kok Kwong. How could he know where she lived? How dare he send flowers to her? "I'm sorry, but I can't accept this. I don't know the sender," she replied quickly. The delivery man looked a bit uncomfortable. "Please, ma'am, I really need you to sign it. If I don't deliver it, I'll get in trouble and they'll dock my pay." He added, "The flowers are beautiful, ma'am. It's just a simple thank you gift for the wonderful moments you shared with him." Lan hesitated, then reluctantly accepted the flowers. "Fine," she said, "but I won't sign anything." "Thank you, ma'am," the delivery man said hurriedly, placing the bouquet on the doorstep and walking away, as if he were afraid Lan would change her mind and return it. Lan stood frozen in place, her mind racing. Could it be that he had been stalking her, tracking her down to her home? What would happen if her husband found out? She didn't want her marriage to fall apart because of a moment of weakness. Her hands trembled as she opened her wallet and pulled out the business card from Kwong. Was he trying to destroy her happiness? Ring. Her phone rang and she answered almost without thinking. "Hello?" It was Kwong's voice, cold and commanding. "It's me. How did you know my address?" Lan stammered, trying to hold her composure. "I didn't stalk you, if that's what you think," Kwong replied smoothly. "The flowers are just a token of gratitude for the wonderful time you shared with me. It's no big deal." Lan could feel her blood boiling. "I told you before, I have a family and I don't want you to interfere in my life. You shouldn't have done this." Kwong's voice remained calm, almost indifferent. "I didn't follow you, Lan. I simply paid a motorcycle driver to follow you and then sent the flowers. If you don't like it, just let me know and I'll pick them up again. But if you prefer to ignore me, that's fine too." Lan felt a wave of panic rise within her. "Don't ever show up in front of me again. Do you hear me? Never." "Come on, Lan," Kwong's voice softened as if amused by her reaction. "You called me bro already, so don't change your mind now. Anyway, why don't you tell me your real name?" Lan gritted her teeth, her hand trembling as she slammed the phone down. She was shaken. Fear gripped her heart. Had he secretly taken photos of her, recorded videos while she was exposed? Was he planning to use that against her? She knew there were many women who had fallen victim to men like him, men who used their power to exploit them, turning them into sexual slaves. And now he was like a shadow haunting her life, threatening to destroy her marriage. How could she live like this? Despite everything, Lan found peace whenever she was near Zhong. He was the man she had chosen, and she had never regretted that decision. If her marriage was to fall apart because of one night with a stranger, it wouldn't be worth it. "Don't worry," she reassured herself. "I won't let it happen." Just then she received another message from Kwong. "I'm just standing far away watching you. I promise not to disturb your life." Lan's heart raced as she read the message. She felt trapped. Her life would never be the same with a man like Kwong lurking in the background. She quickly typed out a message in response. "This has to end now. I'll meet you in 2 days. We need to talk." Minutes later, she received a reply. "Okay, let's meet at the Milk Scent Cafe near the old place. I'll be there." Lan took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. She had to face him once and for all. After changing her clothes, Lan called a taxi to head to the coffee shop where Kwong had arranged to meet her. Throughout the ride, she had been rehearsing her words, carefully planning the sharp and biting things she would say to Kwong. She had already decided that she would end this unwanted relationship once and for all. If this strange and perverse man dared to ruin her life, he would surely pay a heavy price. Lan tried to stay calm, but her hands trembled uncontrollably. It felt like she had fallen into the deepest trouble of her life, a mess she couldn't have imagined even in her worst nightmares. All of a sudden, she found herself in a situation she couldn't get out of. She walked into the cafe, a bit confused, trying to spot Kwong in the dimly lit space. The evening had darkened and the alcohol had blurred her memory, making it hard for her to recall his exact face. The only thing she could vaguely remember was that Kwong was a tall, well-built, and handsome man. As she was scanning the room, a man in a sharp suit, waving his hand toward her, called her name. "Lon, over here." It wasn't just him sitting alone, but 2 other people were with him. The sight sent a wave of unease through her. Could it be that Kwong had planned all of this? Was this some kind of trap to get her into a dangerous situation? But she had already arrived, and running away now would only make things worse. She reluctantly walked over and took a seat beside him. Kwong, sitting next to a man in his 40s who looked distinguished in his attire, and a beautiful young woman introduced them. "This is Mr. Kwong," Kwong said, "the CEO of HKT Technology, and this is Lone, his secretary. Let's all get to know each other better." "Hi, Mr. Kwong. Hi, Lone." Lon greeted them with a polite smile. "I'm Lan. It's a pleasure to meet you both." Mr. Kwong extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Lan. I'm curious. What line of work are you in?" "I work in media and marketing," Lon replied. "I offer content marketing services. I've been doing this for 3 years now, actually." "That's great. We've been looking for someone in that area," Kwong said. "Why don't you give me your number? Maybe we can meet up at my company sometime soon." Lone kindly added, "Let us know when you're available so we can arrange a meeting." Lon read her phone number aloud to Lone, who quickly jotted it down. As she did so, Lon glanced at Kwong. He appeared completely unfazed by the situation, acting as though nothing unusual had happened between them the previous night. This gave her some reassurance, proving that he wasn't using that incident to intimidate her. But why then had he called her to come here? What exactly was his plan? It was hard to say, but her mind couldn't stop racing with questions. For the entire evening, Kwong had been observing her carefully. He found her fascinating, a woman full of personality, yet somehow vulnerable. In all his life, he had been with many women, but none had made such an impression on him as Lan. The way she spoke, her assertiveness mixed with subtle insecurities, intrigued him. Even when she lost an argument and became flustered, Kwong found it amusing. Was this what love felt like? He wasn't sure, but he felt drawn to her, wanting to see her again. "Have you eaten yet?" Kwong asked brightly, interrupting his thoughts. "Why don't we eat and talk business?" "Sure," Kwong chimed in. "Let's enjoy the meal and discuss things while we're at it." "How about some drinks after dinner?" Kwong suggested. "It's been a long time since we've had a chance to sit down like this." Lon hesitated. "I can only drink a little bit, though." Kwong chuckled. "You two make a nice pair." "You know, when are you going to invite me to a wedding feast?" he teased. Lon froze, her eyes wide in alarm. "I'm married," she blurted out before she could stop herself. Everyone at the table looked at her, surprised by her outburst. "Oh, you're married?" Kwong asked, looking somewhat confused. "I thought you two were a bit more than just friends." No, Lon quickly corrected, embarrassed by her reaction. "We're just friends." Kwong flashed her a mischievous smile, his eyes gleaming with a hidden meaning, and winked. Lon tried to laugh it off, but her forced smile couldn't hide the tension in the air. Her sudden defensiveness made it clear to everyone that there was something more going on between her and Kwong. Luckily, the conversation moved on, and no one mentioned it again. The rest of the dinner went smoothly, and Lan gradually became more at ease. She shared her work experiences and discussed her aspirations of starting her own media company one day. She was looking for new partnerships to help make her dreams a reality. After a while, Kwong and Lone excused themselves. They seemed to be giving Lon and Kwong some private time, a moment to talk alone. Once they were gone, Lon turned to Kwong, her face hardening. "I'm warning you," she said, her voice sharp. "Don't ever invade my personal life again. I'm married, and what happened yesterday was an accident. I don't want to see you again." Kwong raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Why are you so upset? I haven't done anything wrong. I just want to be friends with you, Lan. Stop pretending, Lan snapped, her voice louder now. We're not friends, and I don't need your help. The people in the cafe turned to look at them, clearly uncomfortable with the growing tension between the two. Lan was agitated. I don't need a friend like you. I don't want any friends at all. Goodbye, and don't worry. I'm not some fool, nor am I a jerk like you say. I'm Tran Kok Kwong. You're what? She snapped. I don't care who you are, but don't ever come into my life again. Lan quickly stood up and rushed out of the room, eager to escape. She wanted nothing more than to get as far away from this moment as possible. Deep inside, she was filled with regret. The reckless and impulsive actions she had taken yesterday now weighed heavily on her heart. Her words and behavior had been hasty, and now she was left with the bitter consequences. What she hadn't realized was that her impulsive actions could destroy the very thing she cherished most, her family's happiness. Kwong laughed softly as he watched Lan leave. Her words didn't upset him at all. In fact, they amused him. Lan, this beautiful and gentle woman, seemed to have an undeniable charm. He couldn't help but be captivated by her grace and charm. It was a feeling he didn't often experience. But alas, she was already married, and the cruel twist of fate made him feel even more drawn to her. He couldn't deny that, despite the many women who constantly surrounded him, none had ever affected him the way Lan did. Still, Kwong wasn't the type of man who would try to steal someone else's happiness. He respected the fact that she was married and was determined to honor her life choices. However, he still wanted to be her friend. Don't worry, he sent her a message. I just want to be a true friend to you, nothing more, purely platonic. Despite the deep longing inside him, Kwong sent the message with a sense of calm, as though he had no expectations. But Lan had a different perspective. She replied almost immediately, I don't want to be your friend. Get out of my life and never contact me again. Kwong smiled when he saw her message. She had no idea that he had never truly entered her life to begin with. For him, a one-night affair with a random woman wasn't a big deal. It was just a physical need, nothing more. He had done it many times before, paying for these fleeting encounters. To him, it was just an exchange, nothing personal. And yet, with Lan, it was different. There was something about her that made him feel emotions he hadn't experienced with any other woman. As he sat lost in thought, he was interrupted by a voice. Why are you sitting there looking so lost? Where's the beautiful woman you were with? It was Loan, one of Kwong's acquaintances. Loan? Kwong smiled as he looked up. The beauty is standing right here in front of me, he replied jokingly. Loan raised an eyebrow. So you're not going with Kwong anymore? I thought you two were inseparable. Kwong went home. It's Sunday after all. I needed some time for myself. Well, I noticed something. You and Lan, there's something different about the two of you. It's obvious. Kwong laughed. What are you talking about? Nothing's going on. I'm just here to relax. So you admit there's something, huh? You're starting to admit your feelings. Lone teased. You're becoming more perceptive every day, Kwong replied, half seriously, half jokingly. Well, I don't dare challenge the great Tran Kok Kwong, Lone said with a playful smirk. But what about you and me? Want to hang out? I need to escape the city for a bit, breathe some fresh air. I've been feeling so suffocated lately. Kwong hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure, let's go. I could use a break too before I dive back into work. Kwong paid for their meal and the two of them headed out to his car. They drove out to a farm located on the outskirts of Hanoi. It was a peaceful retreat that Kwong visited every weekend to recharge and find balance in his life. He had bought this farm a while ago for just this purpose. Kwong and Kwong had been friends for many years. They shared similar interests, technology, aesthetics, and a similar outlook on life, which made them very close. Before Kwang got married, the two of them would often go on adventurous trips together, exploring the rugged northern landscapes. But once Kwang married, things changed. Kwang, understanding his friend's new responsibilities, didn't visit as often. He had bought the farm to help him live a slower, more mindful life. Lone had entered Kwang's life through their work connection. She was sharp, quick-witted, and had a charming, confident personality. Kwang found her appealing, but his thoughts were often preoccupied with Lan. Lone, on the other hand, was intrigued by Kwang. His good looks, sharp mind, and playful personality had caught her attention, and she couldn't deny the chemistry she felt between them. Kwang and Lowan's complicated relationship. Lone often found excuses to stay close to Kwang. Many people who knew them believed that the two were destined to become a perfect match, a beautiful and talented couple. From time to time, Kwang would take Lone to the countryside to fish at his farm. As a result, many of the workers at the farm assumed that Lone was his fiancé. However, Kwang didn't feel any deep emotions when he was with Lone. He wasn't fond of women who were too smart or too ambitious. He preferred those who were softer, more delicate, and innocent. Yet despite these feelings, he never outright rejected Lone's affection. He always appeared warm and enthusiastic toward her. Occasionally, the two would even go on trips together for a few days. However, Kwang never considered their relationship anything serious. For Loan, things were different. She viewed knowing Kwang and being in his company as an opportunity to secure a life of comfort and happiness. Although Kwang was much older than her, Loan found that perfectly acceptable. If she wanted to marry a wealthy man, she had to accept his flaws, and the most glaring one was his age. After all, there were no rich young bachelors. The age gap between them seemed like a fair trade for all the hard work Kwang had put in to build his career. From the moment Lone met Kwang, she knew she had to pursue him no matter what. There was something cold, almost cruel about Kwang that only made him more attractive to her. There were times when Lone felt utterly helpless, like a failure in matters of the heart, especially when it seemed like Kwang couldn't care less. But just when she thought there was no hope, Kwang would say or do something that reignited the spark of possibility in her heart. At times, neither Lone nor Kwang understood what their relationship really was. When they shared a bed together, they rarely spoke. Even during their rare trips, they hardly ever confided in each other. Lone tried her best, but no matter what she did, she couldn't erase the invisible distance between them. After returning to the farm, Kwang's first action was to head straight to bed. One night, after an exhausting time with Lone, he fell into a deep sleep. As she watched him lying peacefully next to her, Lone felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. This was what she had come all the way here for, to watch him sleep. Meanwhile, back home, Lone's anxiety and regret slowly faded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of exhaustion. Despite everything, she still found Kwang to be an intriguing and attractive man, not a mere playboy. Kwang's elegant, refined demeanor captivated her even more. After spending a night together, it seemed that people often developed stronger feelings for each other. If Lone weren't already married, she might have let Kwang pursue her freely. But even though she would tell him to leave her life, deep down, she thought that being friends with a man like Kwang, a successful director, wouldn't be such a bad thing. These conflicting thoughts swirled in Loan's mind, pulling her into a restless sleep. In her dreams, she found herself with Kwang. The physical attraction was undeniable, but it was more than just that. It was the feeling of being cared for, protected by a man who truly valued her. This was something Lone had never experienced before. The sense of security, the protection he offered, this feeling stayed with her long after she woke up. It was well past midnight when Lone finally stirred. The quiet night and the scent of jasmine in the air created a romantic yet somewhat eerie atmosphere. It had been hours since she had fallen asleep, and she realized she had slept through the entire afternoon. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Kwang. Have you gone to sleep yet, beautiful? I can't sleep either. Can we chat for a bit? Lone frowned as she read his message. I'm already asleep, she replied. If you keep texting me, I'll block your number. Kwong replied instantly. No need to be so harsh. I know your husband's not home. If he were, you wouldn't be out like this. Lone quickly typed back, her tone stern. My husband is coming home soon. Don't message me anymore, or I'll really block you. 2 days, just 2 days. Anyway, let's have dinner tomorrow night after work. I'll wait for you at Min Puang Buffet, he wrote. Lone didn't even bother to reply immediately. She was tired of this back and forth. She was done, but deep down, she knew that Kwong wouldn't just give up. Her intuition told her he wouldn't stop trying to win her over. Kwong had a special kind of allure, one that made him hard to resist. Despite the fact that Lone had told him to leave her alone, she knew with certainty that she would show up at the buffet. From her previous experiences, she knew Kwong well enough. He wasn't the type to be easily rejected. Though Lone seemed like a strong and decisive woman, she was, in fact, deeply intrigued by him. Kwong, on the other hand, couldn't help but wonder if he was becoming a heartbreaker. He sometimes questioned himself. Did he really have a soft spot for Lone? Why then did he keep her hanging on like this? He wasn't sure if he was just enjoying the chase or if something deeper was pulling him toward her. Mon spent the next evening messaging a woman named Lan, who was already married. After finishing his work, he quietly drove home to his empty, oversized house. The place felt too large, too silent. The kitchen, in particular, seemed lifeless, untouched. Dong wouldn't be back until the next day, but even when he returned, the house would still feel cold and lonely. This was the reality of their life. He would rest for a few days, then dive back into his endless work, constantly pulled into projects and responsibilities that never seemed to end. Each time Dong left for work, Lan would be left alone, overwhelmed by a sense of loneliness in the vast, quiet house. She longed for someone to talk to, but no one ever really stayed with her for long. Dong was always preoccupied with his own tasks, and their conversations were brief, sometimes no more than 5 minutes. It was a shallow, mechanical existence, a far cry from the deep emotional connection she had imagined for her marriage. At this point in her life, Lan realized that living with a quiet, introverted man wasn't as idyllic as she had once thought. Sure, it might seem peaceful, but it often felt suffocating. There was no room for complaining, for venting, or even for expressing unhappiness. In their marriage, she was never allowed to feel anything deeply, at least not without it being ignored. If something bothered her, Dong didn't see the need to comfort her. He would simply carry on with his work, assuming that her mood would pass quickly. And it always did. This lack of emotional connection weighed on Lan more than she realized. She would often spend hours scrolling through Facebook, feeling time slip by as her mind wandered. It was still only 8:30 p.m., but she was already beginning to feel the emptiness of the evening. Her hunger was starting to catch up with her, but she couldn't bring herself to cook. She simply didn't have the energy to make anything. Then Lan remembered her meeting with Kwong, the man she had agreed to meet at the restaurant. He had probably been waiting for hours by now, and she wondered if he would still be there. Even if he had already left, just knowing that she would have someone to share a meal with, even for a short while, would offer her a tiny sense of comfort. Lan went to the restaurant, a place she had chosen for its quiet atmosphere, hoping to avoid drawing too much attention. When she arrived, she noticed that the restaurant wasn't crowded at all. There were only a few scattered patrons. She chose a small table in a quiet corner, hoping to remain unnoticed. However, the waiter soon came over and greeted her with a polite smile. "Excuse me, madam, but Mr. Kwong over there has asked me to invite you to sit with him," the waiter said, gesturing toward the far side of the room. Lan was surprised. She glanced over to see Kwong sitting at a table, looking directly at her and waving. She couldn't help but feel a little awkward, but it was too late to back out now. She nodded and said, "Thank you, but I'll stay here. please bring me a grill for my table." The waiter politely left and Kwong waved again, but this time Lan kept her eyes on her phone, deliberately ignoring him. As she scrolled through her notifications, she thought about their conversation earlier. Finally, Kwong made his way over to her table, taking a seat across from her. "You're not going to welcome me?" he teased. "Sitting alone over here isn't much fun, is it?" Lan looked up, surprised by his words, but didn't respond immediately. She felt uneasy, unsure of how to react. "Honestly, Kwong, this is really none of your business," she replied, her voice steady, though she felt conflicted. "I've already told you. I'm married. I love my husband, and I have no intention of divorcing him. You're just a temporary distraction for me, like a disposable tissue, used once and then discarded." Her words hung in the air, and Kwong seemed taken aback, though he quickly recovered. "Why are you being so harsh?" he asked, his voice soft but tinged with confusion. "Don't I mean anything to you at all?" "In my eyes," Lan said coldly, "you're nothing. You're just a passing moment, an insignificant man in my life. So please, stop trying to make me feel otherwise." "Don't you think you're being too quick to judge?" Kwong pressed, his voice growing more insistent. "I don't want to just be a fleeting moment for you. I truly want to be your friend." Lan couldn't help but scoff at his words. "You want to be my friend?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You really expect me to believe that? Men always talk sweetly, but in the end, all you want is something else. All you care about is getting into bed with me, not being a friend." Kwong looked at her, genuinely taken aback. "That's not true," he said, shaking his head. "What I want is something real, something lasting. After all, being with someone for a brief moment isn't the goal. What I'm after is real friendship, a relationship that goes beyond physical attraction." "How naive you are," Lan said, her voice dripping with irony. "Do you think we can really be friends after everything? Do you think I can just forget the physical part and be friends with you?" "How sweet you sound, but I know better. Men are never really after friendship. They want more, and you're no different." Kwong was silent for a moment, as though contemplating her words. He looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "Perhaps you're right," he finally said, lowering his gaze. "But I still believe in something more, something deeper. I just wish you could see that too." Lan stared at him, her eyes hard. "It's too late for that," she said, standing up. "Goodbye, Kwong. I've said all I needed to say. Don't bother me anymore." With that, she left the restaurant, her mind clouded with confusion and unresolved emotions. The night air felt colder than before, but there was no one to share the silence with her. Lan felt the weight of her choices press heavily upon her chest. She had pushed away a man who had only wanted to offer her some semblance of connection. But what did she have left in return? Was this the life she wanted? A marriage that lacked warmth? A relationship that never blossomed? Or would she continue seeking distractions in places where she knew no real connection could ever exist? As the night deepened, Lan realized that the emptiness inside her wasn't something that could be filled with fleeting moments of escape. No, the loneliness she felt had deeper roots, roots that no distraction, no matter how tempting, could erase. "I apologize, but I am not one of those young girls that you can deceive. You see, I feel like you're overreacting. You were the one who initiated things with me. It wasn't me. Yet you constantly claim that I seduced you and took advantage of you. Are you being fair to me? You seem to be unfair, and that's something I need to address. I made a big mistake, and I am doing everything I can to make it right. I've made a grave mistake that I regret, but now I'm trying to fix it. You care so much about this, about us, but it seems like you're being too greedy. Why are you so scared? You fear I'm going to ruin your family's happiness, right? You're raising your guard like a hedgehog, but I haven't done anything to harm you. All I did was express a very reasonable and respectful wish to be friends with you. I'm not here to exploit you. I didn't come here to take advantage of you or anything like that. I'm not that kind of person. In fact, I've been living in America for nearly a decade, and to me, this whole thing doesn't seem that significant. but for you, it's clearly a much bigger issue. I understand that, and I respect your feelings. I've learned from this mistake, and it's something I'll never repeat. But I also believe that our meeting wasn't just a mistake. It was a moment of destiny, a chance for us to meet. And who knows, we might just become good friends one day. Now, I'm hungry. I've been talking so much that I didn't even realize how hungry I am. What about you? What would you like to eat? No, thank you. I'm full. Looking at you, I've lost my appetite. But thank you for this conversation. I'll leave now. Lan stood up and left, leaving Kwong in complete shock. Truthfully, Kwong was very disturbed by Lan's way of thinking and reacting, but at the same time, he found himself intrigued by this woman. She was different, and that made her interesting to him. The next day, Lan unexpectedly received a call from Lone. Lone told her that Mr. Kwong wanted to meet with her to discuss a potential business partnership. Lan thought, "This is a great opportunity to advance my career. After all, it was better than sitting around doing nothing for a small salary." Though life wasn't easy, and she wasn't wealthy, any opportunity for career growth should be seized. Lan arrived at the meeting spot and found Lone and Kwong already there. She felt a little uncomfortable, but still sat down beside Mr. Kwong. "Hello, Lan. I wanted to invite you to lunch and discuss a potential collaboration," he said. "I have a new project that I'm about to launch, and I need someone to handle the communications. I'd really like for you to join the project." He continued, "I've heard a lot about you from Kwong. He speaks very highly of your professional abilities, and I believe we can work well together. If this project succeeds, I'd like to offer you the position of Communications Director in my company." Lan, slightly taken aback, smiled and responded, "Thank you for trusting me. I'll do my best to ensure this project is a success. I'm excited to work with you and the team." "I'm really looking forward to it," Kwong said, smiling. "I'm putting everything into this project, my money and my future, and I truly believe your expertise can help us make it happen." Lan, though modest, replied, "I'm not exactly a specialist, but I will certainly give it my all to achieve the best results." They agreed not to stand on ceremony, and Kwong informed Lan that Lone would be her contact for all the project details going forward. He also asked her to prepare a detailed media and marketing plan. The lunch went smoothly. Everyone made an effort to close the gap, knowing that they would soon need to work together and put in a lot of effort to make the project successful. Lan could see that this was an excellent opportunity for her career. If she became the communications director for HKT, a major tech company in Vietnam, there would be many chances to grow. She couldn't let this opportunity slip away. During the lunch, Kwong remained aloof and distant from Lan. He hardly spoke and seemed indifferent to her. Yet, every time Lan glanced at him, Kwong would smile and wink, acknowledging her curiosity. It wasn't lost on Lan that Kwong was playing some sort of game, one that was both annoying and oddly charming. Lone observed all of this closely. She noticed the odd tension between Kwong and Lan. It wasn't just a casual meeting. There was something more going on here. The connection between them seemed more than just professional. Lone's instincts told her that there was more to this relationship than met the eye. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. As Lan sat there, she couldn't help but feel like there was a deeper story unfolding. The dynamic between Kwong and herself had clearly changed. She was unsure of what it meant, but she had a strong feeling that things weren't as straightforward as they seemed. The boundaries between professional and personal were blurring, and this new phase of her life was beginning to unfold in ways she hadn't anticipated. Although they were just ordinary friends, Lone couldn't help but feel a sense of discomfort when she noticed the way Kwong looked at Lan. It wasn't just any casual gaze. It was the kind of look one would give someone they loved, someone they cared about deeply. Lone couldn't quite put her finger on what it was, but she could feel the tension in the air. The dinner ended quickly as everyone had to prepare for afternoon work. Before Lan left, Lone invited her to stay a little longer, hoping to discuss the tasks and schedule for the ongoing project. They went over everything they needed to, but once the essential details were sorted, Lone took a moment to probe. "Are you two very close?" Lone asked, trying to sound casual. Lan replied with a smile, "We've just met recently." "But Kwong talks about you a lot," Lone continued. "He convinced Kwong to approve you for the media role in this new project." Lone's eyes narrowed slightly. "So, you really just met him?" She couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. Lan seemed a bit flustered. "Yes, just met. He's a good guy. He's helped me a lot." Lone wasn't convinced. Be careful, okay? I think Kwong might be a bit interested in you. Maybe not just as a colleague, if you know what I mean." Lan laughed awkwardly. "Oh, don't worry, it's nothing like that." But even though Lan's words seemed innocent, Lone couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest. There was something off about the way Lan had responded. It didn't add up. She couldn't understand what was really going on between Kwong and Lan, but her instincts told her that things were more complicated than they appeared. After work, Lan quickly drove to the airport to pick up Jong. It took her some time to finally find him. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and weary from the long hours and pressure at work. He was clearly drained, both physically and mentally. As soon as Jong got in the car, he reclined his seat and fell asleep almost instantly, the fatigue from his work weighing him down. Lan smiled softly, watching him. It had been a month since they'd been able to spend any real time together, and now that he was finally home, all he wanted was to sleep. As they neared their home, Lan gently woke him, suggesting they go out to a restaurant to eat. But Jong, still half asleep, just muttered, "I just want to go home. I'm too tired to go anywhere. I haven't had a good night's sleep in forever." Lan understood. She knew how exhausting his work had been. He had been under constant pressure for weeks, and now all he wanted was rest. When they finally arrived home, Lan parked the car and went inside. She found Jong already asleep in their bed. With a sigh, she sat down beside him, her heart heavy with unspoken feelings. It had been a month since they last shared any meaningful time together, and now that they were finally reunited, all he could think about was sleep. She smiled sadly. In a way, their closeness had made them indifferent to each other's needs. Lan longed for affection, for attention, but Jong, exhausted from his work, wasn't able to offer that to her. To him, they would have plenty of time together in the future. Tonight, he simply needed to rest. The difference in their needs was growing clearer by the day, pushing them further apart. Lan often found herself cooking alone when Jong wasn't around, trying to fill the silence with something, anything. Tonight, she sat down at her desk to research the new project for the company. The HKT project was a groundbreaking initiative in the technology sector, a massive undertaking with billions of dollars in funding. It was a challenge, but also an opportunity for Lan to prove herself in the business world. She knew that if she couldn't excel in this project, she might never have the chance to achieve something truly significant in her career. And beyond that, Lan was aware that time was running out. She was no longer young, and the thought of delaying having children any longer was beginning to weigh on her mind. "Are you still awake?" Jong's voice broke through her thoughts. "It's late," he continued, walking over to her and wrapping his arms around her neck. "You should go to bed." Lan looked up at him, her eyes tired. "I've been working on the project. I'm just trying to get everything right. You're pushing yourself too hard. Come on, sleep now. We can talk about it tomorrow," Jong said softly. Lan smiled. "Are you hungry? I can cook something if you want," but Jong shook his head. "I'm not hungry. I just want to hold you. I've missed you." His words, though simple, filled her with warmth. It had been a month of little communication, of distance, both emotional and physical, and now all he wanted was to be close to her. Lan stood up, kissed him on the cheek, and said, "All right, I'll come to bed with you." But before she could react, Zhang swept her into his arms. "I've missed you so much," he murmured. Without waiting for a response, Zhang carried her to their bedroom. The intensity of the moment, combined with the emotional tension that had been building up over the past month, brought them closer than ever. But as they lay together in bed, Lan couldn't shake the image of Kwang from her mind. In that fleeting moment, she realized that she was thinking about him, not Zhang. The memory of their passionate night together, the emotions that Kwang had stirred in her, flooded back to her. She had pushed those feelings aside, convincing herself that it was nothing, just a fleeting moment. But now, with Zhang beside her, she couldn't help but wonder, was this really the life she wanted? Was it enough? In that moment, Lan realized that the feelings she had for Kwang were still there, lingering just beneath the surface. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was something deeper, something that called to her. And as she lay there, tangled in the sheets with her husband, the weight of her own heartache pressed down on her, unanswered questions swirling in her mind. People often say that a one-night affair is just a fleeting game, two people fulfilling their physical needs with no emotional ties, no long-term commitment. But for Lan, it was nothing like that. The sensation of the physical encounter haunted her mind. It stirred up a mix of longing, excitement, and fear. Even when she was intimate with her husband, the images from that one-night experience continued to linger in her thoughts, making her shiver with unease. The memories seemed to take over her every waking moment, their impact so strong that even when her husband was beside her, those haunting images from that night wouldn't leave her mind. The pleasure, the thrill, and yet the guilt. She couldn't shake it off. Was this what she really wanted? She couldn't stop herself from wondering whether she was trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. Soon, another challenge entered Lan's life. She and a successful, handsome man named Kwang were about to collaborate on a big project. Meeting face to face, sharing ideas, and working together were inevitable. But the real question was, could Lan maintain control over her emotions? Could she resist the charm of Kwang, a man who seemed to have everything: success, confidence, and a magnetic presence? A deep, unsettling fear began to rise within Lan. Was her life about to spiral out of control? Would she fall victim to the temptation of Kwang's attention, just as she had done before? Meanwhile, Kwang had quickly completed his task and was now resting, the way most men do: task completed, then straight to sleep. Men, as they say, get the job done and move on, without much concern for the emotional well-being of others. Lan, on the other hand, was wide awake, tossing and turning in bed. She couldn't shake the nagging thought that her peaceful life might soon be shattered. She feared the storms, the upheavals, and the unpredictable forces that could destroy the family she had worked so hard to build. Exhausted, Lan finally drifted off to sleep, but even in the quiet of the night, her mind wouldn't rest. The next morning, the sun's first rays barely touched the horizon when Lan woke up, already focused on the day ahead. She was doing well at work, building a communications plan for HKT, a plan that was highly praised and quickly approved by the board of directors. Her career was on the rise and things were moving fast. Kwang, seeing her potential, suggested that she leave her old company to focus on the new project full-time. He promised that once she transferred, she would be appointed as the communications director at HKT. It was everything Lan had hoped for: professional growth, recognition, and a chance to take on more responsibility. Without hesitation, Lan accepted the offer. Her mind raced with excitement at the new possibilities. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to prove herself. As she made the decision to join Kwang's team, her phone buzzed with a message from Kwang, a colleague who knew about the change. "Congratulations, Communication Director of HKT," he texted. Lan replied briefly with a simple "thank you." Kwong, always with a sly smile, knew this response was a good sign. At least she was no longer avoiding him. There was hope that they could have a more open, genuine conversation in the future, something beyond their professional interactions. For Kwong, this was a positive development, a door that had just cracked open. Later that evening, Kwong texted again, "Let's go out for dinner to celebrate your new role. You've earned it." Although he knew what Lan's answer would be, he still invited her, feeling a sense of anticipation. But Lan didn't respond right away. She didn't refuse, nor did she accept. Her silence spoke volumes. Kwong knew the answer. Meanwhile, Lan was preparing to leave her old company. Before her official departure, she wanted to spend a few days getting ready for her new role. She decided to take the evening off, hoping to catch up on house chores and prepare a nice dinner for Jong, her husband. It had been too long since they had shared a quiet, peaceful meal together. Over a week had passed since they last sat down to eat as a family. Jong was often too busy with work, coming home late and leaving early. Lan felt a growing resentment as she noticed the widening gap between them, his work consuming him while she was left to handle everything else. That evening, Jong came home late as usual. Lan had already prepared dinner, but he was too exhausted to engage. As she checked her phone and saw the message from Kwong, she immediately deleted it. She didn't want Jong to see the message and misinterpret it. Lan was determined to keep her relationship with Kwong strictly professional. She didn't want any unnecessary complications, especially with her marriage at stake. Though she knew that her professional future was closely tied to her interactions with Kwong, Lan was firm. She would not let the mistakes of the past disrupt her present. She couldn't allow Kwong the chance to take advantage of her again. Her marriage, her life with Jong, was too important to risk. As Lan finished tidying up the house, the streetlights outside flickered on, casting a soft glow. She moved quickly through her tasks, feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination. It was late, but there was still so much to do. She couldn't let her fears about the future consume her. Despite the turmoil in her heart, she carried on, hopeful that things would somehow work out. Title: A Heart in the Dark. There's a thought that many people have. A one-night stand is just a fleeting adventure. Two people come together, satisfying their physical needs, and after that, there's no deeper connection, no bond. It's nothing but a game, right? A fleeting moment. But is it really that simple? Is it really that empty? Lan was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. As the aroma of freshly cooked food filled the air, she reached for her phone and quickly typed a message to her husband. "Come home early tonight. I've made your favorite dishes." She hit send, and immediately a reply from Jong popped up. "Sorry, I couldn't let you know earlier. I'm in Ho Chi Minh City for work. They asked me to fly in suddenly and I forgot to tell you. Have dinner and rest early, okay?" Lan stared at the screen, frowning. Jong didn't even bother to mention anything about their plans. Was she still his wife in his eyes? Why didn't he care how she felt? She felt like he was a stranger, coming and going as he pleased, without any regard for her thoughts or emotions. In frustration, Lan turned off the stove and put her phone down. She plopped down on the sofa, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. As she scrolled through her messages, she noticed a text from Kwong. Her finger hovered over the screen for a moment before she typed back, "Okay, let's drink tonight." She immediately got a response from Kwong, teasing her. "Aren't you afraid history will repeat itself?" Lan couldn't help but smile at Kwong's words. This time she wouldn't let things get out of hand again. But she couldn't deny it. She felt lonely, deeply lonely. Her friends were busy with their own families, and there was no one left who had time to sit and talk with her. The only person who came to mind was Kwong. He was the one she could talk to, even if only for a little while. They made plans to meet at a quiet restaurant tucked away in a secluded corner of the city. Unlike the noisy hustle of the streets outside, this place maintained an air of calm. Despite the bustling crowd inside, it was still peaceful. They sat across from each other, their eyes meeting in a strange moment of silence. Kwong stared at Lan for a moment, making her feel uneasy. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she joked. "Is my face dirty, or do I look like I'm going to be eaten alive?" "Relax," Kwong replied with a grin. "I just haven't seen you in a while. I needed to look closely." Lan rolled her eyes, teasing him back. "Don't even start with that flirting stuff. I've heard enough of that back in 6th grade." They both laughed. The conversation flowed easily after that. Lan asked Kwong about a new project at work, hoping to gain some insights into the industry. She wanted to understand the dynamics of the companies involved and get a sense of the overall communication strategy for the project. Kwong responded with enthusiasm, adding humor to the conversation every now and then, making Lan laugh out loud. It felt nice, a relief from the tension that had been building up in her heart all evening. They stayed there, talking until the restaurant began to empty out, the last few patrons leaving as the night deepened. Finally, Kwong broke the silence. "Can I go home with you tonight?" Lan looked at him, raising an eyebrow, her voice firm. "What are you saying? I'm not that easy, you know, especially not with someone who's about to become a business partner. Never!" Kwong chuckled and tried to reassure her. "Of course, I meant I'll take you home." Lan shook her head and stood up, brushing him off with a smile. "I can walk on my own. I'll take a cab. Good night." She waved goodbye, stepping into a taxi, escaping before Kwong could say another word. She needed space, time to think. As the taxi sped through the streets, Lan's mind wandered. She found herself at a quiet lakeside cafe, the soft glow of lights reflecting on the water. It was late, but the cafe was still open, and she welcomed the quiet solitude. She didn't want Kwong following her. Though she doubted he would, she still felt the need to be cautious. But beyond that, Lan just needed some time alone. Her husband hadn't called or texted all evening. Was he even thinking about her? No, she realized, he didn't seem to care at all. The crisp autumn air of Hanoi settled around her as she sat by the window, watching the few people left on the street slowly make their way home. The cool breeze brought a sense of calm, almost as if it was soothing the emptiness inside her. The fading warmth of the fall season was a reminder of the approaching winter, a season of coldness, not just in the air, but perhaps in her heart too. She stared out the window, lost in thought, her mind drifting aimlessly. There were no strong emotions, no sadness, no joy, no excitement. It was as if everything was on pause, and Lan couldn't bring herself to feel anything. The night grew deeper, and the streets grew quieter. She watched as vendors packed up their stalls, the last stragglers from the day's work returning home. For a moment, Lan envied those people. At least they had someone waiting for them, someone who cared whether they were home or not. She had no one to ask if she had eaten, if she was all right, if she had someone to talk to. She was all alone, adrift in a city full of people, but disconnected. The night dragged on, and Lan remained lost in thought. The emptiness inside her grew, and she couldn't escape it, no matter how hard she tried. There was no comfort, no relief, only the dull ache of loneliness. As she finally rose to leave, she checked her phone again, hoping for a message, a sign from Jong, but there was nothing. She felt a pang of bitterness, but she quickly pushed it aside. She wasn't going to wait for him anymore. She wasn't going to let her heart be led on like this. As she walked out into the quiet night, her mind was still heavy, but there was a strange sense of resolution, a quiet acceptance. Maybe it was time to stop waiting. Maybe it was time to move forward, even if she didn't know what that would look like. She stepped into the cab and closed her eyes. It wasn't the end of the world. It was just another chapter of life. And for now, that was enough. Kwong's message made Lan Nubin pause. These men are really hard to understand, she thought. She already has a husband and children, Yet they still message so late at night. Don't they know that it's not appropriate? What if my husband sees this and misunderstands? Lan responded, her tone sharp. I'm at home alone tonight. That's why I messaged. But you should sleep early, okay? Kwang quickly replied to Lan's message, and to her surprise, she felt a certain warmth. Sometimes all a woman needs is for the man in her life to notice the little things, to show that he cares. It wasn't just the words he wrote, but the attentiveness behind them that moved Lan. Kwang's thoughtfulness sparked an unspoken longing within her. She wished that her own husband could be that considerate, that he would encourage and check in on her when she was feeling down. In the quiet cafe, now nearly empty, Lan stood up and walked out into the stillness of the night. Alone, she made her way down the empty streets of Hanoi. Every now and then, a motorbike would pass by, but for the most part, the city seemed asleep. Yet not everyone could sleep easily. Some couldn't rest because of work, while others were kept awake by the weight of their own thoughts and emotions. For them, sleep would not come tonight. As for Kwang, ever since his dinner with Lan, he had found it hard to concentrate on anything else. He turned down an invitation from Loan, who had called him repeatedly to attend a friend's birthday party. Kwang no longer cared about trivial social events. Lan had awakened something in him, a desire for a family, a desire for a woman to share his love, his life, but Lan was already married, and he couldn't bring himself to break up her happiness. Lone, on the other hand, hadn't yet shown herself capable of being the woman he could settle down with. These conflicting thoughts swirled in Kwang's mind, keeping him awake through the night. Life was strange, he thought. There are people who spend their whole lives together and never make a lasting impression, while others, you only meet once, yet they linger in your heart for a lifetime. Why is it that we often fail to appreciate what's truly ours, while we value what isn't? It was a mystery to him. At midnight, a sudden knock on the door interrupted Kwang's thoughts. Every time he felt defeated, he would return to his family. There, in the familiar warmth of home, he hoped to find some peace. As he thought about Lan, busy with the housework, he felt a sense of calm. It had been a long time since the two of them shared a warm meal together, and Jung was looking forward to surprising her. When he arrived home, he was surprised to find the house completely dark. Lan wasn't home yet. She probably thought he wasn't coming back, so she had gone out to spend time with her friends. He pulled out his phone and called her. "Where are you?" he asked. "I'm out running some errands," she replied. "You're home already? Why are you back so early? Have you eaten yet? If not, I can bring food back for you. By the way, today is my last day at my old job. I'm switching companies." "You're quitting your job?" Jong asked, surprised. "You didn't tell me about it. Where are you going to work now?" "I'll tell you when I get home," Lan said, a hint of irritation in her voice. "I'm just wrapping things up here. I'll grab something for you to eat on the way back." Jong's mood soured. Lan had always felt that he was a man who came and went as he pleased, never informing her of his whereabouts. He didn't seem to care enough to share the details of his life with her, and yet he expected her to be understanding, to fulfill his needs. Was that fair? Was it right to expect her to always meet his demands without ever offering the same consideration in return? He thought about this as he lay on the couch, feeling drained from the long trip and the confusing emotions swirling in his mind. Eventually, he fell into a restless sleep, waking only when Lan shook him awake. The clock showed it was already 11 p.m. "Why did you come home so late?" Jong asked, a trace of frustration in his voice. "You knew I'd be home alone, so why didn't you come back sooner?" Lan seemed defensive. "Well, today was my farewell party at the old company. It was hard for me to leave after 5 years. I didn't expect it to take this long, but everyone wanted to celebrate." "Why didn't you tell me about it?" Jong's tone grew sharp. "Where are you working now? Why didn't you share that with me? You make all the decisions on your own without consulting me." Lon sighed. I'm taking a new job with HKT as their director of communications. Why are you making such a big deal about it? It's a great opportunity for me. Zhong's frustration boiled over. He felt betrayed, not just because Lan hadn't told him about her career move, but because she seemed to make her decisions without involving him. I'm your husband, he said, voice thick with emotion. You should share these things with me, especially something as important as this. You can't just keep everything to yourself. Lan, clearly upset by his tone, walked into the kitchen. I bought a cake for you, she said quietly. Or would you rather I make you some noodles instead? It was already late, and neither of them felt like eating or drinking. They decided to go to bed, but each carried a different burden in their hearts. Zhong felt that Lan no longer respected him as before. She made her own decisions and did what she liked without consulting him. He had become invisible in her eyes. It seemed that Zhong no longer mattered to Lan. Whether he was there or not didn't seem to make a difference. This thought filled Zhong with anxiety, fear, and frustration. Meanwhile, Lan also felt uncomfortable. The constant questioning and loud voices of Zhong irritated her. He could leave without telling her, return at any time, and she had to stay at home to serve him. When she wasn't there, he would be ready to question and complain. It seemed as though only he had the right to go and do what he wanted, while she was expected to serve his needs. Lan began to wonder whether Zhong saw her as a wife or simply as a servant. She was fed up. He needed to understand that a marriage should be built on equality and mutual respect. Both of them lay awake, restless, unable to sleep, but neither of them wanted to speak. Each was lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, they both drifted into sleep, weighed down by their frustrations and exhaustion. The next morning, Lan hurriedly woke up to head to her new job at the HKT Tech Company, where she was taking over her responsibilities. Meanwhile, Zhong stayed home, lying in bed until noon. He went to see his doctor to get the test results. As he read each line carefully, he tried to find any mistake, any loophole that would prove the doctor's diagnosis wrong. The harsh truth was too difficult to accept. People often try to find reasons to deny something they don't want to be true, but the more they searched, the more they were disappointed when they couldn't change the facts. At the same time, Kwang had already bought a pregnancy test for Lone early in the morning. He insisted that she take it again so that he could see the results for himself. Lone felt insulted by his actions. Did he think she was trying to deceive him? Was he accusing her of tricking him just to get married? This was completely unacceptable. However, because she loved Kwang, she swallowed her pride and agreed to take the test one more time. When Kwang saw the 2 lines on the test, he was speechless. How many months? He asked coldly. I'm not sure, Lone replied. I haven't gone for an ultrasound yet, but I think it's been about 2 months. Okay, so we'll get married next month, Kwang said nonchalantly. Just like that, Lone asked, disappointed. No grand proposal or anything? What's the point of a big fancy proposal? Kwang replied. The important thing is that we're getting married. It doesn't matter how simple or elaborate it is. It's still a wedding. Lone, still unsure, asked, Do you love me, though? Kwang paused before answering, Do you think I would marry you if I didn't love you? Lone could tell that Kwang wasn't exactly thrilled when she told him about the pregnancy, but it wasn't because he wasn't ready for the baby. It was simply because he wasn't sure how he felt about this sudden change in their lives. He wasn't quite ready to settle down, but now there was no turning back. The baby was coming, and that meant they had to move forward. Afterward, Kwang took Lone to work, and as they left together, Lone felt a deep sense of happiness. It was the life she had always dreamed of, waking up together, coming home together, and sharing meals together. There was no greater happiness than this. People often criticized her for being too ambitious, but all she truly wanted was a stable place in life, a safe harbor where she could live out her youth without worries, knowing she had a partner to share it with. Lone felt that Kwong was that safe harbor for her. Even though he wasn't the perfect romantic man she had once imagined, he was still someone who cared for her. Kwong was a man who might be a little wild and carefree, but he was not irresponsible. He was capable of love and willing to sacrifice for the people he cared about. This made Lone feel happy and secure. She knew that, even though Kwong's heart wasn't entirely hers yet, the baby they were expecting would be the bond that tied them together. On his way to work, Swang felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. At 35 years old, he never imagined he would marry someone like Loan, especially not this soon. In truth, he had only agreed to go along with the relationship because of how much attention and affection Lone showered on him. The care and devotion she gave him felt like a favor he was receiving. He had always seen Lone as someone beneath him, someone whose needs and desires were secondary to his own. He thought it was fine to have fun with her, but the idea of marrying her seemed out of the question. Yet now, with a child on the way, he had no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. Kwong realized that as a man, he had to take responsibility for his mistakes. He couldn't avoid the truth forever, but that didn't mean he was ready to accept it. The thought of losing his bachelor lifestyle saddened him. He regretted that his carefree, independent life was about to end. He didn't feel ready to be tied down to Lone, a woman he had never truly loved in the way he thought he should. Meanwhile, Lan had started her new job at HKT Tech Company. It was a fresh start for her, a new chapter filled with challenges and opportunities. But in her heart, she still carried the weight of the troubled relationship with Jong, and it wasn't easy to shake off the feeling that something was missing. She had worked hard to get to this point, but the uncertainty in her marriage lingered, casting a shadow over everything else. The yearning for hope is waiting for her ahead. It's the hope that she will grasp the opportunity well, so she can leave a lasting mark and achieve certain success in the field she is pursuing. This success will be the foundation for building a complete family. Although she had never been to a doctor, Lan knew clearly that her husband's family was facing a serious issue, 3 years without children, which had caused her considerable anxiety. The pressure to have a child weighed heavily on her, and she couldn't ignore it. That was why she needed to make a lot of money, more money than she ever imagined, to fulfill her dreams, her deepest desires. Lan was led into a spacious room. A large desk was placed right next to the window, with a wide view that allowed her to gaze over an entire corner of the city. In the center of the room, a sofa was arranged for meetings or moments of relaxation during a busy day. It was an ideal workspace, exactly what she had always dreamed of. Despite everything, she had to thank Kwong. He had created this opportunity, allowing her to land such a fantastic job. She was so absorbed in the sight of her office that she almost couldn't believe her own eyes. How could she, Lan, be the communications director of such a large corporation like HKT? "Hello, beautiful director. Can I come in?" Kwong's voice startled her. "Come in, but why are you here at this hour? Did you have business around here?" she asked, surprised. "Today's your first day, right? I just wanted to wish you a smooth start. Hope you don't make me look bad introducing you as an expert in this field," he said with a grin. "Thank you, Kwong. From the bottom of my heart, I'll do my best to meet everyone's expectations," she replied, feeling a little awkward, trying to sound confident. They both smiled. The change in the way they addressed each other felt almost too sweet and affectionate. Kwong had always been her colleague, but now their professional relationship had to evolve. It wasn't just about the job, it was about managing the connection that would help her succeed. Though her landing this job had been a stroke of luck, luck alone wouldn't help her excel in this field. She needed help. That's why she chose to keep her relationship with Kwong more harmonious than confrontational. I hope you'll guide me well so I can complete my work and fulfill the expectations for this role, Lan said, with sincerity. Kwong raised an eyebrow. By the way, what do you think if I get married? Lan froze for a second. The question took her by surprise, and a sudden wave of emotions washed over her. There was an ache in her chest, a mix of envy and regret she couldn't fully explain. She quickly regained her composure. Why would that concern me? It's your personal business, isn't it? She replied, forcing a neutral tone. But Kwong laughed lightly. True, it has nothing to do with you, but I'm still curious to hear your thoughts. Who do you think would be lucky enough to become Mrs. Tran Kok Kwong? Lan tried to mask her feelings, but her mind raced. She was well aware of her own reaction. Why did this question make her feel uneasy? Well, that's your decision, and it's a good thing, really. It would be nice for you to have your own family, she said carefully. Congratulations to you. Just make sure to invite me when it happens. Of course, he replied. Well, I should let you get back to work. I'll leave you to it. I'm sure you'll have a wonderful first day as the new director. Kwong quickly turned and left, leaving Lan staring after him. The man she had once shared a fleeting night with had now moved on to someone else. Suddenly, a heavy feeling settled in Lan's heart. It was as though something precious had slipped through her fingers, but she couldn't quite explain why. Perhaps it was a feeling of selfishness. Kwong had never truly been hers. He had only been a passing breeze, a brief moment of relief in the heat of her life. That breeze would soon disappear, just as quickly as it had come. On her first day at work, Lan had to attend several meetings and meet key partners, including heads of departments, to build relationships and establish connections. Despite being busy and exhausted, she had little time to reflect on her emotions. But when the day ended, as she leaned back in her chair, looking out the window at the sunset over Hanoi, her mind was filled with conflicting thoughts. Life would be much simpler without emotions, without all these complicated thoughts. She mused, just go to work, go home, shower, rest. How easy that would be. But that's just a fantasy. Life doesn't work like that. She was faced with the complexities of relationships, marriage troubles, and the challenges that came with them. These were the things that made people feel weary, frustrated, and sometimes even helpless. Lan didn't feel like going home yet. Zhong, her husband, was probably still at work. When he got home, he'd be busy with his own things just as always. She preferred to sit there, watching the sunset in silence. All right, I'll head home soon. Don't worry about me, she replied to a text from Zhong. I've made dinner, your favorite dishes. I also invited a friend over. The message from Zhong surprised her. Since they got married, he had never once taken the initiative to cook or do anything at home. Yet today, he had planned to cook and wait for her. Was there something going on? Maybe he was feeling guilty about something. Could it be that the stress from their troubled marriage was finally affecting him? Lan smiled faintly and hurriedly left the house. It seemed like a small joy at the end of her day. Yet, inside her, there was a heavy feeling she couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was because Kwong was getting married. She tried hard to remind herself not to feel sad, but the weight of it lingered. To distract herself, she decided to stop by a small shop that sold ready-made food, picking up a few things. She didn't trust Zhong's cooking skills, so she figured it would be safer to buy something rather than risk having to rush out again later, especially since they were expecting guests today. When Lan arrived home, she found a beautifully set dinner table, neatly arranged by Zhong. He was still busy with the final touches, decorating and adding the finishing details. Wow, when did you find the time to cook all this? Lan asked joyfully. You asked for time off for 10 days? This morning, I was just wandering around, sitting at a cafe, and I happened to run into an old classmate. We hadn't seen each other in nearly 20 years, and he's changed so much. Back in the day, he wasn't the brightest student, but now he's a director of a big tech company. Zhang explained, his face lit up with excitement. So I invited him over? Who knows? Maybe he could help me with some new business ideas. Lan smiled, but there was a hint of concern in her voice as she replied, "It's great that you have friends who've become successful. But for me, it's always been about finding my own path. Everyone has their own strengths, right? It's not about comparing." They were having a pleasant conversation when the doorbell rang. Lan rushed to open the door, expecting it to be a friend of Zhong's, but to her surprise, it was Kuang, holding a basket of fruits. He stood there, looking at her in slight confusion. "Is this your home?" he asked. "Is Zhong your husband?" His question made Lan's heart skip a beat. She forced a smile. "So, this is your house? I had no idea. I'm just surprised to find out you're married to my friend." Lan was startled by his comment. "I didn't come here to mess up your life," Kuang said with a nervous laugh. Lan, holding back her emotions, snapped, "Well, now you know. This is my life, and you have no place here." Zhang, sensing the tension, quickly intervened, trying to defuse the situation. "We're all friends here," he said, his voice calm. "Kuang and I were classmates. We sat together for years, and after graduation, he went abroad for his studies. We lost touch until today, when I found out he was doing really well in the tech industry." Lan, still feeling uneasy, tried to keep her composure. She didn't want things to escalate, so she forced a smile and invited Kuang in. "Please, come in. It's a pleasant surprise to see you after so many years." As they sat down to dinner, Lan could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her. Kuang was very interested in hearing about Zhong's work and life. He even asked detailed questions about how the two of them met and got married. His curiosity felt invasive, and it made Lan uncomfortable. Why was fate playing such cruel tricks? The man she had once shared a brief moment with now seemed to be an unexpected connection between her and her husband. How could she face him when he was now a part of her husband's past? But she remained silent, letting the two men continue their conversation. They reminisced about their school days, laughing and chatting as if nothing had changed. Lan, feeling increasingly uneasy, excused herself. "I'm exhausted. I'm going to lie down," she muttered as she made her way upstairs. Downstairs, Zhong and Kuang continued talking, oblivious to Lan's discomfort. As the evening wore on, it became clear that both Lan and Zhong were too caught up in their work to pay attention to their relationship. The demands of their jobs were taking up all their time, leaving little space for each other. When they were home, they would rush to finish whatever work remained, only to fall into bed, exhausted, to do it all over again the next day. Their marriage, once full of warmth and closeness, had slowly transformed into a quiet coexistence. They were like two shadows, merely existing together without truly living. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Neither of them knew where they were headed. Even though they were in the same house, they felt more distant than ever. And then there was Kuang. He continued to visit, often joining them for dinner, and it only added to the growing tension between Lan and Zhong. Lan couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding every time Kuang came over. Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more to his presence in their lives? Would their once happy home become a place where the past and present collided in ways they couldn't control? It wasn't just Kuang's visits that weighed on Lan. It was the sense that something was slowly slipping away. Her relationship with Zhong seemed to be fading, and every day felt like a battle to keep it intact. She didn't know how long this could go on. Something had to change, or their marriage would eventually crumble under the pressure of unspoken feelings and unresolved tensions. And so the days went by, with Lan finding herself caught between the responsibilities of family, work, and her own inner turmoil. But through it all, she couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to give. Would she be able to confront the issues that were pulling her apart, or would she continue to live in the shadows of her own life, quietly watching as everything she held dear slipped further away? After a few uncomfortable moments, Lan gradually became accustomed to Kwang's presence in her home. Despite her best efforts, neither she nor Kwang could feel completely at ease around each other. There was an undeniable sense of awkwardness, something that didn't quite sit right between them, a feeling that ordinary friends wouldn't experience. The truth was, the tension between them was palpable. It's hard for anyone to act naturally when there's an underlying physical connection, even if nothing has happened between them. At this point, Kwang was busy preparing for his wedding, so he had less time to visit Lan's house. Furthermore, his project was advancing much faster than expected, requiring him to devote more time to work. Lan, too, was caught up in her own work, which left her drained. She had lost weight, and whenever she came home, all she wanted was to collapse into bed and sleep. Her exhaustion was overwhelming. She could sleep at any given moment. But something was different in her body, something that left her feeling uneasy. The intuition of a woman made her realize that something significant was happening inside her. That morning, Lan bought a pregnancy test kit to check. She had been late for her period for almost 2 months. This wasn't the first time it had happened, but Lan couldn't help but hope that something wonderful might be happening. When she saw 2 red lines on the test, she couldn't believe it. Her heart raced. She was pregnant. The child she had been longing for 3 years had finally come to her. Tears of joy welled up in her eyes as she marveled at the miracle of motherhood. It was a moment that left her speechless, so unexpected, so overwhelming. "Jong, I'm pregnant," Lan called her husband immediately after leaving the bathroom. Jong was speechless on the other end of the line, a rush of mixed emotions flooding over him. He didn't know how to react. There was happiness, confusion, and doubt all at once. How could this be? How could this miracle happen to them when he had been told that he could never have children? This was beyond anything he had ever expected. How could this be? "Are you sure?" Jong asked, trying to understand the news. Lan reassured him. "I just took the test, but I'm still going to get an ultrasound to be sure." "Are you sure? Really?" Jong questioned again, the uncertainty clear in his voice. "Yes, but I'll still get checked," Lan confirmed. "You know, the test is usually very accurate." "Okay, stay home. I'll take you for an ultrasound later," Jong said, his voice still filled with confusion. "No, let's do it tomorrow. I have a lot of things to do today. Just be careful, okay?" she said, trying to calm him down. As soon as they hung up, Jong was in a state of turmoil. His thoughts were all over the place. He immediately called the doctor who had previously examined him in Ho Chi Minh City. "Hello, doctor. I need to ask you something," Jong said urgently. "What are the chances of me having a child given my condition?" The doctor's voice was blunt. "If you don't have sperm, the chances of having a child are 0%. It's extremely difficult to conceive naturally. We would need to take more aggressive treatment measures. There might be a chance with medical intervention, but it's very unlikely." The doctor's words hit Jong like a ton of bricks. He was stunned, but the reality was undeniable. "So, with my current condition, it's impossible to have children, right?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Unfortunately, yes." "I'm sorry to tell you this," the doctor replied. "Thank you, doctor," Jong said, his voice heavy with grief. As he ended the call, it felt like the ground beneath him had crumbled. The world suddenly seemed darker. How could this be happening? He couldn't have children, and yet his wife was pregnant. What did this mean? The only possible explanation was that she had been unfaithful. Maybe she had gotten pregnant by another man. But that didn't make sense. He had known Lan since she was in her first year of college. She was not the type of woman to be unfaithful. Yet here they were, her pregnant and him unable to father a child. How could he explain this? How could he understand this situation that seemed so impossible? The more he thought about it, the more confused and unsettled he became. He had to face this reality, but how? What should he do now? Meanwhile, Lan was basking in the joy of her newfound pregnancy. It felt like such a wonderful blessing to her. She was excited to become a mother, something she had dreamed of for so long. She decided to immerse herself in everything related to pregnancy. She searched online for books and resources to learn how to care for her baby, even before it was born. She couldn't wait to be a mother, and this sense of anticipation filled her with joy, quietly watching as everything she held dear slipped further away. After a few uncomfortable moments, Lan gradually became accustomed to Kwang's presence in her home. Despite her best efforts, neither she nor Kwang could feel completely at ease around each other. There was an undeniable sense of awkwardness, something that didn't quite sit right between them, a feeling that ordinary friends wouldn't experience. The truth was, the tension between them was palpable. It's hard for anyone to act naturally when there's an underlying physical connection, even if nothing has happened between them. At this point, Kwang was busy preparing for his wedding, so he had less time to visit Lan's house. Furthermore, his project was advancing much faster than expected, requiring him to devote more time to work. Lan, too, was caught up in her own work, which left her drained. She had lost weight, and whenever she came home, all she wanted was to collapse into bed and sleep. Her exhaustion was overwhelming. She could sleep at any given moment, but something was different in her body, something that left her feeling uneasy. The intuition of a woman made her realize that something significant was happening inside her. That morning, Lan bought a pregnancy test kit to check. She had been late for her period for almost 2 months. This wasn't the first time it had happened, but Lan couldn't help but hope that something wonderful might be happening. When she saw 2 red lines on the test, she couldn't believe it. Her heart raced. She was pregnant. The child she had been longing for 3 years had finally come to her. Tears of joy welled up in her eyes as she marveled at the miracle of motherhood. It was a moment that left her speechless, so unexpected, so overwhelming. "Jong, I'm pregnant!" Lan called her husband immediately after leaving the bathroom. Jong was speechless on the other end of the line, a rush of mixed emotions flooding over him. He didn't know how to react. There was happiness, confusion, and doubt all at once. How could this be? How could this miracle happen to them when he had been told that he could never have children? This was beyond anything he had ever expected. How could this be? "Are you sure?" Jong asked, trying to understand the news. Lan reassured him. "I just took the test, but I'm still going to get an ultrasound to be sure." "Are you sure? Really?" Jong questioned again, the uncertainty clear in his voice. "Yes, but I'll still get checked," Lan confirmed. "You know, the test is usually very accurate." "Okay, stay home. I'll take you for an ultrasound later," Jong said, his voice still filled with confusion. "No, let's do it tomorrow. I have a lot of things to do today. Just be careful, okay?" she said, trying to calm him down. As soon as they hung up, Jong was in a state of turmoil. His thoughts were all over the place. He immediately called the doctor who had previously examined him in Ho Chi Minh City. "Hello, doctor. I need to ask you something," Jong said urgently. "What are the chances of me having a child given my condition?" The doctor's voice was blunt. "If you don't have sperm, the chances of having a child are 0%. It's extremely difficult to conceive naturally. We would need to take more aggressive treatment measures. There might be a chance with medical intervention, but it's very unlikely." The doctor's words hit Jong like a ton of bricks. He was stunned, but the reality was undeniable. "So, with my current condition, it's impossible to have children, right?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Unfortunately, yes." "I'm sorry to tell you this," the doctor replied. "Thank you, doctor," Jong said, his voice heavy with grief. As he ended the call, it felt like the ground beneath him had crumbled. The world suddenly seemed darker. How could this be happening? He couldn't have children, and yet his wife was pregnant. What did this mean? The only possible explanation was that she had been unfaithful. Maybe she had gotten pregnant by another man. But that didn't make sense. He had known Lan since she was in her first year of college. She was not the type of woman to be unfaithful. Yet, here they were. her pregnant and him unable to father a child. How could he explain this? How could he understand this situation that seemed so impossible? The more he thought about it, the more confused and unsettled he became. He had to face this reality, but how? What should he do now? Meanwhile, Lon was basking in the joy of her newfound pregnancy. It felt like such a wonderful blessing to her. She was excited to become a mother, something she had dreamed of for so long. She decided to immerse herself in everything related to pregnancy. She searched online for books and resources to learn how to care for her baby, even before it was born. She couldn't wait to be a mother, and this sense of anticipation filled her with joy. Little did she know, her world was about to collide with a harsh reality. The miracle she had prayed for was not without complications, and the truth would soon come to light, challenging everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, and the future. As time passed, Lan would have to confront the complexities of her pregnancy, and Jung would have to wrestle with the truth about what had really happened. Would they find a way to move forward, or would the distance between them grow too great to bridge? Their journey was just beginning. She was also researching websites that offer advice on preparing for childbirth. After all, it is one of the most incredible experiences a woman can have in her lifetime. There's nothing more beautiful than becoming a mother, right? Her life would never be boring again. A child would become her greatest companion. Overwhelmed with joy, Lan didn't question why, after 3 long years of trying, she had been unable to conceive, but now it seemed almost effortless. For her, it was something natural. If something is meant to come, it will. That day, Lan kept a soft smile on her face. The energy she felt from the baby growing inside her made her feel indescribable happiness. She made an effort to finish her task early, eager to go home. Lan was certain that Dong would be equally excited to hear the news. This child was the one he had always dreamed of. Their home would soon be filled with the sounds of a baby's laughter and cries. When she got home, Lan saw that Dong had already finished preparing dinner. The table was set with all of her favorite dishes. Lan felt joy bubbling up inside her, realizing that Dong was finally changing. He had started paying more attention to her, to their family life. The baby would help both of them reconsider their priorities and spend more time together as a family. At the dinner table, Lan spoke a lot about how they would care for their child. She tasked Dong with the responsibility of coming home early and looking after both her and the baby. Lan painted a beautiful picture of their future together. When the baby comes, if it's a girl, she'll be beautiful just like you. If it's a boy, he'll be smart, just like his father, she said. I will invest in the best education for our child, sending them to the best schools with the finest teachers, Lan continued. I don't expect them to be a genius, but at least they'll grow up to be someone the society respects. Dong smiled, somewhat awkwardly. You're worrying too much, Lan. Right now my job is to make sure you eat well and stay healthy. Lan chuckled softly. I'll be careful. I'll make sure I rest if work becomes too tiring. But for now, everything is running smoothly. I'm not too stressed at the moment. I'll make sure to take care of both myself and the baby. Their conversation continued late into the evening, meandering from one topic to another, filled with dreams and plans for their future. By the time they went to bed, it was nearly midnight. Both of them were wide awake, though for different reasons. Lan was so incredibly happy with this unexpected gift from life. She could feel the love and anticipation for her child growing within her heart. But Dong was plagued by doubt, uncertainty, and resentment. He couldn't sleep. How could he, knowing that the woman he loved and trusted had betrayed him? If Lan had indeed been unfaithful, and this child wasn't his, how would he face her? Would he accept this child as his own, even though it might belong to another man? Or would he leave her, especially now that she was carrying a child, an innocent baby who had nothing to do with the situation? Both choices were unbearably painful. No matter what decision he made, he knew he would carry the weight of it for the rest of his life. Lan had always been the woman he loved and trusted, but the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like she had been deceiving him with no shame, no guilt. Her carefree attitude, her insistence that everything was fine, it hurt him more than he could express. He couldn't help but wonder, when had she become someone who could lie without hesitation, without a hint of remorse? Since finding out about her pregnancy, Lan had been distancing herself from Kwang. She only met him when absolutely necessary, always with her secretary by her side. She made sure to avoid any situation where Kwang could get close to her alone. The relationship between them had returned to a purely professional level, like they were just acquaintances again. Kwang, on the other hand, felt a deep sense of responsibility toward Lan. No matter the circumstances, she was carrying his child, and their future depended, in part, on the well-being of the family she would form. So Kwang decided to take her in so they could both have the time and space to care for each other properly. One evening, after work, Kwang received a phone call from Dong. "We need to meet tonight." Scene 1. Kwang had something he wanted to talk to Jong about. He had tried to reach him several times but hadn't been able to get through. "Hey, there's something I need to tell you," Kwang texted. "What is it? You can just tell me over the phone," Jong replied quickly. But Kwang felt the need to meet in person. "No, we need to meet up. Come to Puang Hung's hot pot place. Just a little chat, okay?" When Kwang sent the message, a feeling of nervousness crept over him. He had always been careful with Jong. Ever since that night, when they had spent time with Lan, he hadn't done anything that would raise suspicion. Kwang was meticulous about keeping his distance from Lan, especially after discovering that she was married to Jong. He didn't want to interfere in their relationship in any way. But why did Jong want to meet? What was on his mind? Scene 2. Kwang arrived at the restaurant and saw Jong sitting alone, drinking. Jong was known for his poor tolerance for alcohol. If he was drinking alone, something serious must have been bothering him. The thought only heightened Kwang's anxiety. "Why would you drink alone like this? Shouldn't you wait for me to join you?" Kwang asked with a nervous chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. He sat down across from Jong, who didn't even respond. "Long time no see. I brought a bottle of wine. Let's drink and warm up," Kwang said, trying to be casual. "But seriously, what's on your mind? Why are you drinking like this?" Jong remained silent for a moment, then finally spoke, his voice barely audible. Do you think your wife has been acting strangely with any other man at work?" Kwang froze. His heart skipped a beat. The question caught him off guard. Was Jong suspecting something about his wife? Or had he discovered something? Kwang's mind raced. How did he know? I'm just a business partner of your wife's company. I don't really meet her much outside of work," Kwang stammered. "But I don't think there's anything strange going on. Why are you asking?" Jong's eyes narrowed. "There's something I need to clear up," he said, pouring Kwang another glass of wine. Kwang hesitated, but Jong's persistent offer made him feel uneasy. What was he up to? Jong seemed determined to get Kwang to drink with him. It felt like he had some hidden agenda, maybe trying to make Kwang drunk so he could get him to confess something. But Kwang knew he could hold his alcohol better than Jong. Just as he expected, it didn't take long for Jong to start showing signs of drunkenness. His face flushed and he slumped over, knocking his head on the table. Kwang watched, unsure of what to do, and then, in a quiet voice, Jong asked, "What would you do if your wife was carrying another man's child?" Kwang's heart sank. The question hit him like a ton of bricks. He stared at Jong, who was now barely able to keep his eyes open, tears streaming down his face. "Why are you asking me this? What do you mean?" Kwang demanded. Jong lifted his head, his voice trembling. "Just answer me, Kwang. What would you do if your wife had a child with another man? Would you stay with her, live with her, and raise the child as if it were your own?" Kwang's mind was racing. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was Jong accusing Lan of something? Was it true? How could he even ask such a thing? Zhang, now completely intoxicated, slurred, "Or would you divorce her?" "What would you do?" Kwang tried to calm him down. "You're drunk. I think you've had enough. Let me take you home." Zhang shook his head, not allowing Kwang to get up. "No, I want to drink more. I need to drink more. I want to forget everything." Kwang, seeing the state Zhang was in, realized that he had to take him home. He carefully helped Zhang to his feet and guided him out to the car. As they drove, Kwang couldn't stop thinking about what Zhang had said. Scene 3. At home, Lan was anxiously waiting for Zhang to return. She was worried because he had left without saying anything and had turned off his phone. The moment she heard the sound of a car pulling up and the voice of Kwang calling out to her, she hurried down the stairs to open the door. What happened? "Why is Zhang like this?" Lan asked, looking at her husband, who was barely conscious. Kwang helped him inside and laid him down on the couch. Lan noticed how disheveled Zhang looked. He was clearly in a state of emotional turmoil. "What's going on? Why is he so upset?" she asked. Kwang, still shaken by the night's events, looked at her with concern. "There's nothing to worry about. He just got a bit too drunk. But he did say something strange. He asked me what I would do if you were carrying another man's child." Lan froze. The words hit her like a slap in the face. How could Zhang even think such a thing? "Why would he say that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What did you tell him?" "I told him it was crazy," Kwang replied, but he kept asking. He seemed so lost. Lan was speechless. She hadn't been prepared for this conversation. It was the first time in her life that she had seen Zhang so vulnerable and broken. She looked at her husband, still processing everything. He's never been like this before. You know how he is. He doesn't drink. Even when we were with friends, he only had a little sip. But tonight, he's different. Kwang nodded. He didn't know how to explain it, but he too felt something was off. There was more going on beneath the surface, but neither of them knew exactly what it was. As they looked at each other, a quiet tension filled the room. It seemed like a storm was brewing, and neither of them could escape the inevitable questions. Scene 4. Lan sat beside Zhang, her mind racing with thoughts. She had always known her husband to be strong and stable, but tonight he seemed like a completely different person. Could there be something she didn't know? Something he wasn't telling her? For the first time, Lan questioned the stability of everything she thought she knew about her life with Zhang. She couldn't help but wonder, had something changed between them? Or was there something deeper going on that neither of them had acknowledged? The night dragged on in silence. Lan gently reached out and touched Zhang's hand, hoping that somehow the truth would reveal itself. But for now, she could only wait and wonder what tomorrow would bring. Today, he's so drunk that he can barely sit up, needing someone to help him home. He's overwhelmed with joy because of the baby, yet his behavior is strange, as if he's been hurt by something. In his drunken state, Dong suddenly speaks up. "You betrayed me like this?" Lan is stunned by his words. Why is he acting like this? What's going on? Has he discovered the one-night affair I had with Kwang? Or did Kwang mention something to him while drinking? But no, Dong is usually so sober in his mind. How could he say something like this? Lan wonders, feeling a deep sense of panic. But there's more. Dong continues to speak in a daze. "You're pregnant with someone else's child." His words are nonsensical, but the pain in his eyes is unmistakable. What is he talking about? Does he really believe that? Lan feels her world crumbling around her. Could it be true? Was the child in her womb the result of her affair with Kwang? Everything is spinning out of control, and she can't understand what is happening. Dong's rambling doesn't seem to be the usual drunken nonsense. The tears streaming down his face show real agony. He's not just mumbling random words. His broken words are coming from deep within his heart. Normally, these words would never pass his lips, but the intoxication has loosened his tongue. As Lan sits there, paralyzed, she feels every word he says as if it's a knife cutting through her heart. Meanwhile, Kwang has already fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep on the sofa. His body lies motionless, but the tears still flow. Perhaps he's enduring so much pain, suffering in silence with no way to escape. All he can do is lie there, helpless, as Lan looks at him in confusion. What is happening to her family? After years of waiting for a baby, why does it have to be like this, bringing so much pain and heartbreak? Why is Dong so convinced that she's been unfaithful? The thought of it makes Lan feel even more lost. In the morning, when Lan wakes up, she finds herself on the couch beside Dong. The sunlight is already flooding the room. Dong is up, cooking breakfast for her, acting cheerful as though nothing had happened the night before. Lan is puzzled. How can he be so normal now? "Eat breakfast. Don't just lie around," he says to her with a casual smile. Lan feels the need to ask, but she holds back, unsure of how to approach him. She's still confused and uneasy. "Why are you sleeping on the sofa? What happened last night, Dong?" Dong seems to brush it off. "I'm sorry, I was just so drunk. It won't happen again." His apology is almost too easy, and it makes Lan even more anxious. "But I've never seen you drink like that before," she responds. "Was something wrong?" Dong tries to reassure her. "Nothing's wrong. I just got too excited." But his words don't comfort her. She knows something is off. Something terrible is being hidden from her. People often say that when someone is drunk, they speak their truth. So what Dong said last night in his drunken state must be how he truly feels. His words pierce her like arrows, and she's left wondering, what's he hiding? What's he afraid to say? These thoughts keep haunting her as she heads to the office. She can't shake off the feeling that something is terribly wrong. When she arrives, she immediately calls Kwang. She needs to know if there's something she's missing, something that could explain Dong's strange behavior the night before. "Did Dong say anything to you last night?" Lan asks, her voice trembling. Kwang's response is quick and sharp. "No, nothing. He was just drunk, asking if I knew anything about you having an affair." Lan is taken aback. "But why would he say something like that? Why did he mention me being pregnant with another man's child? Does he really think that?" Kwang sounds alarmed. "He's crazy. Does he actually believe that? Why would you even ask me that?" Lan feels a cold shiver run through her as she hangs up the phone. Could it be true? Could Dong really be infertile, she thinks to herself? If it's true, would she have to divorce him? She doesn't want him to live with that painful reality forever. She knows she has to find the truth. In a frantic rush, Lan heads home. She starts tearing through Dong's things. She digs through his clothes, his documents, searching for any clue that could explain what he said. Her hands tremble as she opens his briefcase, pulling out files and papers. Finally, she opens a medical report, and her heart sinks. There it is, Dong's infertility diagnosis. Her eyes go blank, and she collapses onto the floor, overwhelmed by the revelation. All the pieces of the puzzle fall into place now. Dong's words, his pain, his anger, everything makes sense. But it's too much for Lan to bear. She doesn't know how to move forward. How could they possibly face the truth together? When Lan was drunk, the truth seemed impossible to grasp. Could it be true that the child growing in her womb was the result of a one-night affair with Kwang? This was beyond Lan's imagination, a reality that she could hardly accept. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her life had been full of unexpected twists and turns, with 3 years spent waiting for happiness, only for it to slip away in a single day. Now, all that remained was confusion, frustration, and sorrow. Lan found herself trapped in an unbearable situation. Should she pretend nothing had happened and stay with Dong, watching him suffer silently through the years of pain and confusion? Or should she face the painful truth and leave him behind? Either option seemed impossible. The burden of this decision weighed heavily on her heart. This was not what Lan had hoped for, nor what she ever imagined her life would become. Why did life have to be so cruel? Why did the heartache, the agony have to fall upon her? The sound of Kwang's phone call startled Lan, and she felt a wave of fear rush over her. She didn't know why, but seeing his name on the screen made her feel uneasy. "Where are you?" Kwang's voice came through the phone, filled with concern. "I came to the office but couldn't find you. I was worried." "Worried about me?" Lan's voice cracked as she tried to hold back her tears. "What's it to you?" she snapped, her emotions spilling out. "Why don't you just leave me alone and get out of my life?" "What's going on, Lan?" "Are you okay?" Kwang pressed, sensing something was terribly wrong, but Lan was too distraught to answer. She hung up the phone, letting the tears flow freely as she collapsed back onto the floor. The pain in her chest seemed overwhelming. She needed to release it, to cry until there was nothing left. Kwang, on the other end, felt a pang of guilt and unease. He knew something was wrong with Lan, but he couldn't understand what was happening. He couldn't help but feel that he was somehow the cause of all the pain she was enduring. If the child inside Lan was his, how could he live with the knowledge of the pain he had caused? Kwang hesitated for a moment, but then made another call. This time he called Dong. "Where are you? Are you working today?" Kwang asked when Dong answered. "I'm at work. Sorry, I was a little out of it yesterday. I had too much to drink," Dong replied with a sheepish laugh. "Please, don't worry about it." Kwang didn't laugh. He was serious. "Dong, I need to ask you something. What you said before, about not being able to have children, is that true?" Dong paused, his voice growing somber. "Yes, it's true. I went to the doctor and they said I can't have children, no sperm." He hesitated, then added, "But please, keep this between us. I don't want Lan to know." Kwang took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation. "So, if the child Lan is carrying is mine, what do we do?" His voice wavered with uncertainty. "But if it's not mine, then who's the father?" Dong didn't answer immediately. Kwang continued, "This is a mess. I can't just walk away from it. What about Lan? What about everything we've built together?" Dong sighed heavily. "I don't know. This is a nightmare." Kwang disconnected the call, feeling utterly lost. The truth was hitting him like a ton of bricks. The child in Lan's womb could indeed be his, but it could also belong to someone else. Either way, the situation was a tangled web of lies, guilt, and confusion. If the child was his, what should he do? He couldn't simply ask Lan to leave Dong and be with him. That would never happen. Besides, Lan was still in love with Dong, and they were about to start a family together. Kwang, too, had his own life, his own commitments. The choices in front of him were overwhelming, and there seemed to be no easy answer. The truth, however, had a way of unraveling everything. Back at Lan's house, she sat on the floor, gathering her strength. She packed her clothes into a suitcase, trying to steady her shaking hands. The thought of leaving Dong, of walking away from everything she had known, filled her with dread. But perhaps that was the only choice she had left. She couldn't ask Dong for forgiveness, not after what had happened. She knew, deep down, that he would never forgive her. And so, in silence, she made the painful decision to leave. Her heart ached as she thought about the years they had spent together. Yet, there was no other option. It was the only way for both of them to find peace, even if it meant facing a future alone. It was a heartbreaking decision, but one she believed would help them both in the long run. With a heavy heart, Lan left the house, leaving behind the life she had known. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was the only way she could see to move forward. As for Dong and Kwang, they would have to come to terms with their own pain and find a way to navigate the complex web of emotions, lies and choices that had ensnared them all. Life was never simple, but in the end, the truth always found its way to the surface, no matter how much we tried to hide it. It is often said that letting go of the past to find peace within oneself is one of the most worthwhile things to do. But for Lan, that evening was a night she would never forget. The winter air had grown colder as the night stretched on. She arrived home late, her heart heavy with the strong smell of alcohol clinging to her. As she walked into the house, she couldn't hold back her tears when she saw Dong. He looked completely defeated, broken. He had been drinking again, but that wasn't what made Lan's heart ache. It was the way he sat there, all alone, the exhaustion etched on his face. Dong, who had always been so full of life, had now turned into this empty shell. Lan could feel the tension. Dong wasn't speaking, but she knew what he was thinking. He had always been so quiet, so introverted when troubled. He could have talked to her, but instead he seemed to retreat even further. He collapsed on the sofa and closed his eyes tightly. The truth was, Dong wasn't completely drunk. He was still aware, but didn't know how to face Lan. How could he look at her and pretend everything was fine? He didn't want to fake a smile, nor did he want to yell at her in anger. Yet, the lies, the betrayal, the deceit, it tore him apart. He loved Lan deeply, and that was precisely why he felt so much pain. He could never hate her, but the hurt was unbearable. "Can we talk?" Lan's voice broke through the silence, her words trembling. Dong slowly opened his eyes, startled by her presence. Lan was holding a piece of paper. It was the test result, the doctor's report that confirmed Dong's infertility. He looked at it but didn't say anything. What more was there to say? The doctor's diagnosis was clear. The fact was written on paper, and it had changed everything. Lan's voice was steady now, but full of sorrow. "The doctor already explained it. There's nothing more to say, Dong. The person who needs to explain is you." Dong shot up, his heart pounding. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and hurt. "Explain? What do you want me to explain?" he shouted, his voice rising. "What about you? What about the child in your womb? Who is the father, Lan?" His hands clenched into fists as he glared at her. His eyes were wide with pain, but they also burned with frustration. Lan was quiet for a moment, her face pale. She had already acknowledged her betrayal. She had already accepted the consequences of her actions. She had no excuse. "I'm sorry, I don't expect forgiveness. I never wanted to hurt you. I never thought I could cause this much pain." Dong's face twisted in agony. "So, what now? You're leaving? Is that your solution?" He laughed bitterly, but the sound was hollow. "You think apologizing will make everything okay? Do you think that's enough?" "I've already made up my mind," Lan replied, tears streaming down her face. "I've filed for divorce. I'll leave. I know I've failed you as a wife. I can never undo the hurt I've caused. I just want to disappear from your life." Dong's heart sank. His legs weakened and he stumbled backward, his body trembling. He grabbed the divorce papers from her hand and, in a burst of emotion, tore them into pieces. "Number, I can't let you go like this," he whispered. "We can't just end it this way. Not without talking, not without trying." But Lan was already falling apart, her heart breaking with each word Dong said. "Please, Dong, just let me go. You don't deserve this. You don't deserve me." Dong turned away, his voice breaking. "I don't want to hear it. I need space. I need time to think." His body was shaking with anger, frustration, and yes, love. He could never hate her. That was the hardest part. Lan stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him from behind. She clung to him as though her very life depended on it. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I don't know how to make it right. I can't fix what I've done." Dong didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was clouded. His heart was torn between the love he still felt for Lan and the betrayal that had shaken him to the core. "I need quiet," he said at last, his voice low. "I need to be alone. I need to think." "Okay," Lon whispered, wiping her tears. "I'll give you the space you need, but please, please don't go out. Don't leave like this." That night, Lon lay in their bedroom, sobbing quietly. Dong sat in the living room, his mind a chaotic mess of emotions. Both were lost in their own worlds of confusion and despair. The future seemed so uncertain. How could they ever move past this? Could they rebuild what was broken? The next morning, Lon was startled awake by the sound of her phone ringing. She glanced at the screen and saw that it was Kwong calling. Reluctantly, she answered. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Open the door." Kwong's voice was cold. "I need to talk to you." Lon stood silent for a moment, her hands trembling. "I have nothing to say to you." But Kwong was insistent. "You're carrying my child, Lon. Don't you want me to tell Dong the truth? Open the door, or I'll make sure he knows everything." Lon's heart pounded in her chest. Her hands clenched the phone as though holding on to her last bit of sanity. "No," she said, barely able to speak. "I don't want you here. Leave me alone." But Kwong didn't leave. He sent her a message, one that made her heart stop. "This child isn't mine, Lon. It's his. Don't make me reveal everything. It's better for you if you stay away from me." Lon couldn't believe what she had just read. Her thoughts were spinning out of control. She didn't want Kwong involved anymore. She had to put an end to this nightmare. After hanging up, she sat at her desk and began typing an email to Kwong, explaining that she needed to take a leave of absence due to her pregnancy and the stress she was under. It was the only excuse she could come up with to take some time off and think. As she clicked send, she realized her life was falling apart. Her world had shattered into pieces. How could one mistake cause so much destruction? Her job was in jeopardy, her marriage was on the brink of collapse, and now she felt completely alone. Everything had started with a single selfish decision. One moment of weakness had unraveled everything. A life built on trust and love had crumbled in an instant. The painful truth was that sometimes our own choices lead us to a place of no return. The cost of betrayal was more than she could ever have imagined. She felt broken, and now all she could do was pick up the pieces, no matter how shattered they were. Despair spread through her heart as she cried uncontrollably. "If only I could go back to the past," she thought to herself. "I would never have done such a foolish thing. I wish I could take it all back." But when you utter the words, "if only," it's always too late. She felt overwhelmed, suffocated by guilt and regret. She wanted to write a long letter, pouring out her apologies, asking for forgiveness. She knew she could never undo what had been done, but she hoped that somehow, through words, she could make amends. After that, she would leave. She would go far away from here, find a new job, somewhere peaceful, and raise her child on her own. She promised herself she wouldn't trouble anyone again. Her mistakes were hers alone to bear, and she would face them head on. She would take full responsibility for the consequences. As she sat there, lost in thought, she heard the door creak open. Footsteps echoed through the house. Suddenly, Dong came back. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. She had thought he had left for work, but here he was, standing in the doorway. Dong stood there for a moment, staring at her with concern. "I thought you had gone to work," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought you left, but why are you back?" Dong smiled softly and stepped closer. "I was worried about you," he said. "I decided to come back early. I couldn't leave knowing you were here alone. We need to talk. Let's part ways." Tears welled up in Lan's eyes as she whispered, "I'll manage. I can take care of our child. You don't have to worry about me." Dong shook his head, stepping closer to her. "You're my wife, and that child is mine too," he said firmly. "I can't just walk away. I won't leave you. That baby is the greatest gift you could ever give me. No matter the circumstances, I won't refuse it." His voice cracked slightly, showing the depth of his feelings. "I don't want to lose you, Lon. I want this child, even though I know it's painful for me. But I want to raise our baby together, and that means we'll face everything, the good and the bad, together." Lon, her heart breaking with emotion, whispered, "But how could I tell you the truth?" Dong looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "What truth?" She gasped, fighting back the tears as she spoke. "This child is the result of a one-night affair with someone I don't even know. It happened before you came back to Vietnam. Since then, I've done nothing to hurt you, but now I feel like I'm drowning in shame." Dong's eyes widened, his face filled with shock. But there was no anger, no harsh words. Instead, his voice softened. "Lon, I know this is hard to say, but I can't let you go. I won't let you leave, not when you're carrying my child. You're my wife, and I'll be here for you no matter what." She sobbed, her heart breaking even more as she thought of running away, of leaving everything behind. "I just want to escape this city. I want to leave this place and run far away from my mistakes. I can't face anyone here, not after what I've done." Dong, without hesitation, reached out to her, holding her tightly. He whispered in her ear, "Wherever you go, I'll go with you. I can't leave you alone, especially not like this. You're my wife, and we're in this together." She looked up at him, eyes swollen from crying. "But Dong, the city, the people, everything here." Dong took a deep breath and spoke softly. "If you want to leave here, we'll leave. I understand. I know this place might be too much to bear. I can transfer to the office in Ho Chi Minh City. We could start fresh there. You'll have the chance to work in the company, and we can raise our child in peace." Lan's eyes widened slightly, hope flickering in her heart. "You would do that? You would leave everything behind just to be with me?" Dong smiled gently, caressing her cheek. "Of course. I love you, Lan. You're my family. We will go wherever you need to go. If that's what it takes to heal, we'll start over. Together." Lan, overwhelmed by the depth of his love and commitment, let out a shaky breath. The weight of the past seemed to lift just a little, replaced by a glimmer of hope. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling but filled with gratitude. "Okay, let's go. Let's leave everything behind. We'll start fresh, together." Dong gently wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a warm embrace. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. He had made the right choice, and so had she. Together, they would face whatever came next. No more running, no more hiding, and with that, they stood together, ready to face a new chapter in their lives, a chapter built on love, understanding, and second chances.